Today's episode will deal with themes of sexual assault, rape, and violence against women, so please listen consciously, and if you need help, one resource in the United States can be found at the National Sexual Assault Hotline. You can call it 24 hours at 1-800-656-4673. Well, that's really intense. I see it kind of is like kind of a vibe killer. Trigger warnings, kind of a vibe killer. You heard it here.
I'm glad you're here on this Sunday. I'm going to get right into the message. I'm going to tell it like it is, as they say. Oh, I heard a hallelujah. Did you think I don't know what the hell is going on? And a lot of strange places. Where in the hell have you been? Hellfire! 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 All right. Okay, there's something else, too.
Hello, and welcome to the Satire Fire. I'm Sydney.
And I am Samuel, and for this one, I am sitting my male ass down and listening.
Yeah, as you might have been able to tell from the intro to this episode, this is going to be kind of an intense one at times. And so once again, I just want to reiterate, please listen consciously, take care of yourself. If you need to stop listening, stop listening. If you need to stop and scream as loud as possible because you're angry, do that. Whatever you need to do. I mean, maybe be conscious of the people around you if you're in public, but also go off. Scream if you want.
Yeah, listen consciously and scream consciously.
And scream consciously. But today we're going to be talking about the book. It's a series of short stories, Her Body and Other Parties, by Carmen Maria Machado. And we are just going to be talking about the first story in this book today, which is The Husband Stitch. This series, if you're a new listener, welcome. We're so glad you're here. If you're a recurring listener, this series will be a little bit different than some of our other book series, because since it's a collection of short stories, we're not going to be talking about every single story. Instead, in each episode, we're going to be talking about one or two stories that have similar themes and doing it all in one. So we'll talk about what the story's about, the context of the story, maybe context of the author's life and how her life relates to that story, and then doing an analysis of it all in one episode. And usually that's spread out across 3 episodes. So for example, the last book we read for the podcast and discussed was Lula Dean's Little Library of Banned Books by Kirsten Miller. Samuel led us in that series, and if you want to go back and listen, the first episode was a summary, the second episode was kind of a context of that book, and the third was our analysis episode. So this will just be a little bit different. Should still be fun, should still be a good listen, but just want to let you know up front what to expect. I'm really excited to talk about it. This is one of my favorite books, and actually, not to plug this right here, but we have this like bookshop.org affiliate link. If you go to it, you support the podcast, you support a local bookstore, you don't support Amazon, but on it we have lists of my favorite books and Samuel's favorite books, and this has been on my favorites since we started that link. So
yeah, and we also have a link to, or a list of all of the books that we've covered on the podcast, so I think this is going to be the first double featured book that we have on our list.
Double feature, yeah. So yeah, I'm excited to talk about it, but before we do that, Samuel, what's been going on in your life? You've been listening, reading, doing anything recently you want to chat about?
Yeah, so I recently finished a rather hit book. Of all of the books that I have read recently, I think that it is the best selling of them, and it is Thursday Murder Club by Richard Osman. If you're unfamiliar, it's the first book in a series of books that are all kind of like murder, mystery, crime thrillers, where the point of the book is that the vibe is supposed to be rather cozy. So the Thursday Murder Club deals with a group of people living in a retirement village who, as a activity to keep themselves occupied while living at this retirement village, have formed what they refer to as the Thursday Murder Club, where they all get together once a week and look at cold case files of murders and true crime files and stuff like that, and try to puzzle them out and figure out what actually happened, or who it is that got away, or who the murderer might be, whatever the situation might be. And someone who is involved with the retirement community gets murdered. And the Thursday Murder Club, because they love this kind of stuff, take it upon themselves to start trying to investigate the murder as concerned citizens and try to figure out what happened and who did it. And so you're both following the local police in their investigation, as well as this group of 4 senior citizens who are kind of trying to bumble their way through investigating the crime at the same time and providing help to the police when they're able to, and also getting as much information from the police as they can so that they can keep playing their little game. And I enjoyed it. It's a really fun little casual read. I recommend it if you want something that is relatively lighthearted and has a relatively optimistic view of the world and life. It has a really fun conclusion to it that I enjoyed, and I think that it's worth taking the time to read. I didn't love it as much as some people seem to, and the main reason for that is I didn't find the main characters to be as charming as I think some people do. Like, I don't know if it's just because I have a interesting relationship and feel kind of strangely about true crime, to where it kind of put these characters on the back foot for me from the get-go, that they were like really into true crime, or if it's just the way that they go about the entire story kind of seems like they are, like, really you're just reading about a group of old people interfering with a police investigation. But then also you don't really like I didn't really like the police officers, because I don't feel like they did enough to really, like, ingratiate themselves with me as characters. So I don't know. I enjoyed it. And if I have a gap in my reading in the future, I might try to read the next book in the series and see how that goes. But I didn't love it. So if you're interested in, like, a very British, very cozy mystery murder thriller, I say give it a shot. It was fun and enjoyable, and maybe you'll get more of it out of it than I did.
Very British. My friend just moved to Brighton, actually, this past week.
Congratulations to them.
I'll ask her if she's read it.
Yeah, it's gonna be I don't know if it's gonna be a TV show or a movie, but it's going to be adapted by Netflix here soon.
Okay. Yeah, I haven't read it. It's not really my thing, but
yeah.
I mean, yeah.
But have you been reading or watching or doing anything lately that you want to talk about?
Yeah, so this actually happened last month, and well, for context, we're recording this in August, so this happened in July, but I think it's rather relevant to the episode we're doing today. So there is this play that is on a limited run on Broadway right now called John Proctor is the Villain. It initially was starring Sadie Sink, who people probably know from Stranger Things. She played the role of Max, but also she's done other things. She was in the All Too Well 10-minute version music video short film. But I actually saw it like the week or like maybe 2 weeks after Sadie Sink left the main role, which was sad. I didn't get to see her, but it still was fantastic. And actually, it was one of my favorite things I've ever seen on Broadway, or just favorite plays I've ever seen. It is set in a rural Georgia high school in 2018 during the height of the Me Too movement. And these girls, it's a group of really 5 girls, but 4, and then one of them, the main character, Shelby. Well, and they're all the main characters, but Shelby, she's been out of school for some time. No one really knows where she was. Turns out she was kind of at like a psychiatric crisis live-in center because of some things that happened to her. But no one knows. Like, there's all these rumors being spread about her. Like, is she pregnant? Like, what's going on? Why is she out of school? She comes back, and she was kind of a part of this group, but when she comes back, it's weird. But these 5 girls are in their English class, and they're studying The Crucible. And I've never read The Crucible, and it's a limited run, and so it's only on Broadway for a little over 2 weeks. So anyone in the New York area or going to be here in the next 2 weeks, I would say like try to go, and you don't have to read The Crucible before. But I mean, I know kind of the premise of The Crucible. Samuel, did you read The Crucible in school?
I did. I actually, my high school English teacher was in the process of getting her master's degree while I was in her class, and she was doing her master's dissertation on The Crucible. So we did a whole section in like a really deep dive on The Crucible.
Okay. Well, this play is assuming that typically when people study and discuss The Crucible in their high school English class, John Proctor is portrayed as the hero, or as like the good guy in the story. I don't know if that's what happened for your English class, but that's what's happening in their English class. And as they're studying it, as it's at the height of the Me Too movement, and as they're just experiencing like sexual awakening and first loves and just what it is to be like girlhood and femininity and navigating their coming of age experiences, as they're doing all of that, they're starting to see parallels between this like interpretation of John Proctor as the hero and their own lives, and like male power, and how they actually are kind of realizing like he wasn't a good guy and he took advantage of this teenage girl, and then she was made into the villain when really she was probably, I mean, she couldn't really consent. And I guess I could spoil it because I'm sure most people aren't going to see this play, but it was just fantastic, and it made me sob. Like, I have a picture, and my friend that I went with has a video of me. Like, I was just like, sobbing in my seat. It was just so good. And so, like, I'm sure the tickets are really expensive, but there's a lot of ways in New York you can get same day or discounted tickets. So if anyone's going to be in the New York area in the next 2 weeks, totally try to see John Proctor as the villain. It was fantastic. I really enjoyed it. Kind of made me want to read The Crucible, even though I feel like when you miss the like window of opportunity for The Crucible in high school, a lot of people just, that's not something maybe they would choose to go back to. Yeah.
It's arguably something that we could discuss on the podcast at some point.
Yeah, maybe.
Because it is I don't know if I would call it a satirization, but it is absolutely a critique of McCarthyism is the whole point of The Crucible. And so I would have to re-look at it and see if it classifies as satire or not. But yeah, it's a really interesting dissection of the time period within which it was written.
And yeah, there's like a scene, because it's also, it's The Crucible set in the Salem witch trials. And there's a scene where the girls all just like, speaking of screaming, they just all like are on their knees and like scream at the top of their lungs. And there's like a joke about, wait, I can kind of see why these girls would just like go into the woods and run around and scream. And like, so I don't know. It was really good. Would definitely recommend. I hope, I'm like, maybe there's like a one shot of it or something. Like I want to I want to be able to watch it again. But yeah, so with that, let's get into The Husband Stitch. So like I mentioned, this book itself is a collection of short stories. The Husband Stitch is the first story in the collection, and I'm going to do a brief summary, but I actually would just totally recommend reading it yourself. Sometimes we do try to do these episodes where, like, if you don't have time, or it's been a while since you've read a story, or whatever reason that you don't want to revisit or read a story, like, we try to do the work for you where you won't have to, and you can still be an enjoyer of this podcast. And I'm going to do that, but it's a short story. It's available online for free because most of the stories in this collection were published on different outlets before the book itself was published. So I totally recommend reading it, or any of the stories that we're going to discuss in this book. But The Husband Stitch is an illusion. Does anyone remember from their language arts literary classes what illusion means? Samuel, yeah. I see your hand up. What does illusion mean?
Oh, let me see if I can word this appropriately. So whenever you're talking about figurative language, something that is a simile or a metaphor or something along those lines, you're taking two disparate things and connecting them through language. If you use an extended form of that throughout a work, then it starts turning into an illusion where essentially you've created a story in which certain elements can wholesale be replaced by what you're actually talking about. So you write an entire story talking about how red was at war with blue and the difficulties that are taking place in the society as a result of that. And if you just Control F throughout the document and replace red with Republican and blue with Democrat, then that is the actual story that you're trying to tell. But you've just replaced all of the relevant descriptors with a new word in order to slightly obfuscate what the actual story is about. Mm-hmm. Am I wildly wrong?
No, that was fantastic, actually. It's more in-depth than what I was going to say. So, yeah. But basically, this is like, it's more of a direct reference and an indirect reference to another mythical story that has kind of been passed down through more so word of mouth over time, but it is found in the collection of short stories In a Dark, Dark Room and Other Scary Stories, which I had that book as a child and read this, but it's called The Girl with the Green Ribbon. Yeah. And so this is an allusion to that story, or more so like a retelling, honestly. And basically, The Girl with the Green Ribbon, very simple. There's a girl. She has a green ribbon tied around her neck. She doesn't tell anyone why the ribbon's there. She goes about her life. People ask. She says, no, I won't tell you. Eventually, she falls in love with and marries this man. He's like, what's the ribbon? She's like, nah, bruh. Not telling you about the ribbon. But he keeps asking her. She won't tell him. And then finally, she's on her deathbed. And she says, okay, you can untie the ribbon. And when he does, her head falls off. So when this is told as a scary story, you know, picture like you're sitting in a dark room with your friends at a sleepover and you have a flashlight and you're like, he untied the ribbon and something fell. It was her head. Ah! You know, that's kind of And so did you hear that story as a kid, or did you have In a Dark, Dark Room?
I mean, it's a very, very commonly used metaphor, like throughout history. Like, I think that you can find this all the way back in, I'm gonna get the name wrong, but like Sir Gawain and stuff like that. Like, if you've watched The Green Knight, a very similar metaphor is used where it's like it's not being used in the same way in this story, obviously, but the trope of ribbons being a metaphor for the life that you're living and the untying of a ribbon results in your death. Like, I mean, even the Fleet Foxes use it in one of their songs, like White Winter Hymn, I believe it is. So yeah, I'm sure that I have seen, if not that story, a version of it a couple of times in my life.
Yeah. And so before I do my brief summary of the husband stitch, I wanted, Samuel, you to read in this interview with New Limestone Review, Carmen Maria Machado answered the question as to, like why she chose to write this story. And this was her answer as to why she was retelling this story.
I guess the original story, which is an oft-patched folktale / urban legend with a lot of history behind it, doesn't have a ton of self-awareness. When I was thinking about it as an adult, with more perspective than when I first read it as an 8-year-old, I realized that this idea of a blithely persistent husband and the wife who refuses and then concedes was sinister and terrifying and perfectly in line with my experiences as a woman. So it seemed like a story ripe for the recasting. I had something new to say about that story and how it relates to the idea of, quote, good men.
So, in The Husband Stitch, similar to The Girl with the Green Ribbon, there is a teenage girl, I think it says she's 17, and she is at a party, and she meets this boy, and it's kind of love at first sight. She knows she's going to marry him someday. She's filled with desire. She meets him, and from the first kiss, they leave the party, they step to the side. From the first kiss, the boy asks her about this green ribbon tied around her neck. And then the story is really filled with a lot of sex and sexual desire, and I want to come back to that. Mm-hmm. But they leave the party, they park by a lake and they have sex. Then she continues to date him, her parents love him, everyone loves him. They continue to have a thriving sex life, and she's very aware of her role as just a woman, and mm-hmm. she knows that this is who she's supposed to be. She's supposed to be this woman who is this man's object of pleasure and desire, and she seemingly is acknowledging that, but also taking pleasure in it, I would say. She, not pleasure, but contentment with it, mm-hmm. because that's maybe the right word. And then eventually she talks a little bit about her childhood, and all throughout this book there's just little side stories that are somewhat metaphors for the experiences of womanhood. Mm-hmm. And one of them I do want to revisit, but I don't want to take a bunch of time going into all the little side stories. But then basically on her 18th birthday, so they date for a year, and then on her 18th birthday he asks her to marry him. She says yes, and then they have sex. And throughout their relationship, he continually has been asking her about this ribbon, and she keeps saying, no, this is my ribbon, quit asking me about the ribbon. And then they marry, they go on a honeymoon in Europe, and she gets pregnant while she's in Europe. As she comes back into the US and is she's pregnant, and then she's giving birth to her child, she's very nervous about if the child will have a ribbon. And this is where we learn, and we've kind of gotten hints that every woman in this world has a ribbon. Not mm-hmm. all of them are around their necks, but every woman has a ribbon somewhere tied on their body. And they're different color ribbons, and they're in different locations, but all women have a ribbon. And she's kind of worried, hoping in a sense that it's not going to be a girl and that it won't have a ribbon. Mm-hmm. And so the baby's born. It's a boy. She has a son. She's kind of relieved. And then after she gives birth, there's kind of some complications during the birth. She's in labor for 24 hours. She is able to do a vaginal delivery of the baby, but for a bit they thought that they were gonna have to do a C-section. They end up not having to do a C-section. So she's given birth to the baby, and then the doctor and the husband are discussing the husband stitch, and basically just saying the husband says something along the lines of how much to get that extra stitch, and you offer that here, right? And the doctor is like, you're not the first one to ask about this, blah, blah, blah. And basically it says they discuss it, and then when she wakes up, the doctor pops in, and he's like, you're all sewn up. Don't you worry. Nice and tight. Everyone's happy. And basically the husband stitch is just this thing that's actually real. It's not just in the story. Mm-hmm. Not a common practice anymore, as far as I'm aware. But it's one extra stitch when they sew up any like damage that's done in giving birth to make a woman's vaginal canal tighter.
Yeah, specifically just like the entryway to it.
The entryway.
And I think that it's worth noting that during this conversation between the husband and the doctor, the narrator, the wife, is drifting in and out of consciousness. She's not fully present for this conversation. She's kind of recounting the fragmented memories that she has of the time following the birth. And so she is in no way able to give consent or actively participate in the discussion of whether or not her body has been altered expressly for the purpose of a man's pleasure.
Yeah. And something I think that I haven't really mentioned yet that I think is interesting about this story is from the beginning it says, if you're going to read this story aloud, and then it gives you stage directions for what sound effects to make or what voices to use when reading specific characters. And this is kind of to mimic the verbal storytelling of scary stories or like folk tales and how they're usually told aloud. But it also is like to make commentary. So like it says, if you read this story aloud, please use the following voices. And it says me as a child, high pitched, forgettable, as a woman, the same. Things like that. And so after this husband stitch happens, she's kind of reflecting, or before, like while she's in and out of consciousness, like Samuel just mentioned. It says, if you're reading this story out loud, move aside the curtain to illustrate this final point to your listeners. It'll be raining, I promise. And also it says, if you're reading this story out loud, give a paring knife to the listeners and ask them to cut the tender flap of skin between your index finger and thumb. Afterward, thank them. So it's things like that I think just like really drive the point home is like the purpose of them. But yeah, and so then she gives birth to her son, and her son starts to grow up, and like when he's young, they have a really special relationship. She's close to him. She tells him stories, like she's always telling stories that she reflects on in her head. Now she's telling them to her son, and he will touch her ribbon, but never in a way, she says never in a way that makes her afraid, unlike when her husband touches her ribbon. And she actually doesn't allow her husband to even touch the ribbon. She continues to give her husband whatever he wants sexually, but like once again won't let him touch the ribbon. But one night he does like pin her down and touch it, and she kind of has to beg him to stop. Her son eventually goes to elementary school, and she feels a little bit lost, and so she enrolls in art classes, and she meets this woman there who's modeling nude for them to paint, and she goes to coffee with that woman after the art class and is like attracted to her, and she feels like shame about this, about her attraction, about like desires that are her own and not rooted in her husband. And she goes home and she tells him, but he thinks it's hot. So
yeah,
and then the desire goes away, and she doesn't feel it anymore once she tells him, and he feels that way about it. And she never goes to the class again. As her son grows up, he becomes more like his father. He eventually goes to high school, he graduates, he marries, he moves away, he has a perfect happy life just like his father did. And the couple moves away, not like the woman and her husband. They move away and they get a new house. They have sex like in every room in the house, and then basically at the end of her life, exactly same with the girl with the green ribbon. He's like, she's given him everything that he's ever wanted, but he still wants to touch the ribbon. He still wants to untie the ribbon. And so she finally allows him to, and when he does, her head falls off her body. And that's the husband stitch. Anything I missed that you think is important to note?
No, I think that covers the plot, and then I think that we can talk more about it, obviously, in the themes and the review section and stuff like that. But yeah, that's hitting all of the highlights. I think that that's enough to understand what's going on.
Yeah. So I do want to do like an analysis, but like I said, I want to talk a little bit about Carmen Maria Machado and like some inspiration for this story specifically. I'm going to talk more about her life in another episode, but this is the only time I'm going to talk about like where she's from and things like that. And so basically she grew up in the Lee Valley of Pennsylvania, specifically Allentown. And she's Cuban American. Her paternal grandfather immigrated to the U.S. from Cuba and met her grandmother, who was an Austrian immigrant. She grew up in a very religious Methodist household, which religion is a theme that she somewhat explores, but more so talks about in her memoir, In the Dream House, which I'll come back to in another episode. But religion was something that was very complex for her as a queer woman. She lived in Pennsylvania for some time in her adult life with her ex-wife, but after they separated, she moved to Brooklyn, and that's where she currently resides. Never ran into her, though, so that's sad. Something that I think is super admirable about Machado is that she takes her art very seriously and sees the power of it. In an interview that she did for Solstice magazine, she said, "As for the question of activism, I think that if you're a woman, a queer person, a person of color, a non-cisgender person, a non-able-bodied person, etc., writing is inherently a form of activism because you're staking a claim in a world that is not meant for you." And that's something that is very evident in this book, and that I think that idea of like a world that's not meant for you is something that's like really a theme of the husband stitch, like woman in a man's world. And so when speaking about this novel, which was published in 2017 and kind of about the themes and concerns of it as a whole, not just about the husband stitch, she said it deals with the oppressed body, gender, sex, and sexuality, media, myths and legends, and ghosts and the uncanny. And she often writes fiction that is inspired by or touches on the genres of horror and fantasy. We can see that all throughout this book. You can see it in her memoir, In the Dream House. And she also has a short story horror collection that is published. And then Samuel, I wanted to send you like horror, don't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I definitely was able to pick up on the themes of that. And like, it's very clear that she pulls a lot of inspiration from Mary Shelley specifically. And
that short story horror, or I don't know if it's short stories. I think it's a graphic novel. That's what it is. And so I haven't read it, but I've read her other book. But in this interview she did with the Paris Review, they asked her about her inspiration from the horror genre and like why she weaved horror into her stories. And I thought it was very interesting. And so
horror is one of my favorite genres because it's so limber. In some ways, it's regressive. It's still very male and white. The fact that Get Out was so big this year is amazing, but also unusual. On the other hand, horror can be a very transgressive space. It reflects so many of our anxieties and fears. When you enter into horror, you're entering into your own mind, your own anxiety, your own fear, your own darkest spaces. When horror fails, it's because the writer or director isn't drawing on those things. They're just throwing blood wherever and seeing what sticks. But horror is an intimate, eerie, terrifying thing. And when it's done well, it can unmake you, the viewer, the reader. That tells us a lot about who we are, and what we, individually and culturally, are afraid of. I love the ability of stories to have spaces in them where the reader can rush in. That is the work I am most interested in, and that is the work I am most interested in writing.
I liked that. As someone who isn't really a reader of horror, it actually has surprised me how much I've loved both of her books that I've read. And I think that this like touches on why maybe for me, because it's, even though it's like horror, it's so realistic, and it amazes me how she uses these like classic horror tropes to bring light to like very real anxieties and fears and experiences of marginalized people specifically. And I don't know, I'm sure work like this exists outside of these books, but like I feel like my experiences with horror haven't been like rooted in that kind of thing. And so
Yeah.
And the last thing I wanted to say about her before we kind of get into the analysis is like, and I've already mentioned this, that she is Cuban American and she is queer, but she draws on her own experiences with her body in this book, and she talked about that in a different interview with Solstice magazine. I read lots of different interviews, and she says that her experiences with her body as a queer woman, as a fat woman, as a woman of color, as a woman who either wanted to or has had sex, as a woman, period, have shaped my concerns as a writer. And then further down, she says, slut shaming and homophobia and transphobia can exist outside of religious context. She had been talking about religion. Also, we're obsessed with weight and food shaming, and people of color experience their bodies being routinely devalued, set upon, and destroyed on a regular basis. Our culture hates bodies. Its only interest is making us hate them and punishing us if we don't. And she also discusses in that interview how just like the oppression of our bodies is something that binds women together. And while like patriarchy does touch people in different ways, depending on like intersections of types of privileges and identities and etc., it's there in one form or another for every woman identifying person, is like the oppression of bodies. And so I thought that those interviews like really spoke to kind of like the main theme of this book, but also the theme of this story. So yeah, and there's not like, kind of similarly to Kirsten Miller, there's not like a ton of information about her personal life out there, but I don't think it's like super relevant either, because I think it's like her identity and her experiences are really an inspiration for her stories. And so I think if we discuss that, we've discussed like what we need to know for getting into the analysis of this book.
Yeah.
So as we move into the analysis, I'll probably have Samuel link this in the show notes, but I found this timeline on Tulane University's website, and it's a timeline of the history of sexual violence in the U.S. And I'm not going to go through the entire thing. It's pretty extensive. But what I want to mention is that today we're going to be talking about sexual violence and violence against women, but it's not limited to women, and particularly people of color and like Black men in history and Indigenous people in history, women and men, really just Black and Indigenous people in American history of all gender identities have endured an insane amount of violence against their bodies and their personhood. And I'm not like particularly going to be talking as much about that, but it's something that this like timeline really focuses on. But today we're talking more so about like women, and I just want to say that like men as well, and a lot of gay men, are a part of this story and a part of this history. And something that I know that matters to Carmen Maria Machado is like archival history and the silence of the archive, and how a lot of stories have been left out. And she's talked about that in interviews, and she talks about that in her memoir. And so I just wanted to note that like there's so many resources and places online where you can learn about sexual violence and its history and how pervasive it is in our culture. And I do not have time to do that justice in today's episode. But I thought this was a good timeline and a good place to start if you want to learn more. But speaking of that, what do you, Samuel, I have like, I think 3 main things I want to talk about in terms of like themes and like what I got from this story. But what stood out to you about the husband stitch?
Yeah, it's very obviously, to me at least, a story about the way in which women are valued within a society that prioritizes the experiences of men, where every aspect of the narrator, specifically every aspect of the narrator's body, is seen as a way to provide sexual pleasure for the man in her life. And that is seen through, obviously, the title and the event that the title is referring to within the story itself. But you also see it through the way in which the husband interacts with her ribbon, where, generally speaking, the only times in which he is concerned about the ribbon is when they are having sex or about to have sex, and he will regularly run his fingers over the ribbon while they're having sex, or toy with the knot and the bow of the ribbon while they're having sex, because it seems that he doesn't understand what the ribbon is or could possibly be, but seems to intuit that since it is on her, it must be some method by which he can gain sexual gratification. And that's obviously a reflection of the way in which women and their bodies are perceived by cis heterosexual men, men in general, in our society, where it's not that a woman is an entity within herself, but a woman is a container that is specifically holding a man's gratification.
Mm-hmm. You know, a critique I saw, not to get into the reviews of this book, but a critique I saw, not just of the husband stitch, but of this book as a whole, is the amount of sex in it, which actually just pissed me off. And in an interview, Machado said that the sex is not the story is not serving the sex is serving the story. And I'm like, how could you read this and think that this is like supposed to be erotica? Like, but yeah, I think that like the representation of the ribbon is, well, it like was kind of 2 things for me. I don't know what you kind of thought the ribbon represented, but first it was kind of just like a woman's like internal intimacy, like not like her, like, because she's giving like her physical intimacy, quote unquote, mm-hmm. to him. Like everything she has, she's giving to him. But like she has this one thing that's just hers, and it's like represented on like what she holds on the inside that he can't have. Like, you can't take this from me. You may be able to take like who I am physically, but you can't take my thoughts. You can't take. And so I kind of saw it as that. It's like the representation of the one thing that's hers. But I also saw it as kind of like the shared burden that women feel, just because all of the women have one. And it's kind of like it's very rare, like as a woman, it's very rare that I meet someone who hasn't experienced sexual violence of some kind at the hands of a man. And I think that maybe this is like representative of that. It's like but I don't know what you thought the ribbon was representative of.
I think that I would disagree. I think that it's left open enough that many interpretations can fill in the blank of what the metaphor is supposed to be related to the ribbon. But I think that the ribbon isn't necessarily meant to represent anything, because I don't think that it is her internal thoughts because, and this is why I was indicating that the whole thing is about the consuming of a woman by a man for his sexual pleasure, is the entire section of the story where it is talking about her realizing that there may be another level of depth to her own sexuality. And once she realizes that and expresses that, her husband then fetishizes that realization. And so not even her own sexuality is something that she can have as something of her own without it being co-opted by her husband as a form of gratification. And I think that that's something that a lot of queer women can speak to, and just people in general. I think that you can look at the culture today and see a lot of instances of straight men fetishizing lesbian relationships or the queer relationships that women take part in. And so I think that because of it dealing with that very directly, of this is the most personal thing that she has to herself is her sexuality, and even that isn't sacred. That's not something that she can keep to herself without it being exploited for her husband's gratification. I think that the ribbon is really meant to just be nothing at all. It can't be, it's not something that is significant or noteworthy. It's just hers. And because it's hers, it must also be usable by him. And there's not another layer of meaning behind it. It's just kind of the summation of the parts that make her a person, really. And once she's given that up, there's nothing left of her. She's dead.
She's dead, yeah. No, she does say, like, at one point, she's like, I've given you everything you have ever asked for. Am I not allowed this one thing? And he's like, why do you want to hide it from me? And she says, I'm not hiding it. It just isn't yours.
Yeah.
But her body can't be hers. Because
Yeah.
it's his. Everything is his.
Yeah.
Something, I think, just around the theme of, like, being a woman in a man's world. And that's an oversimplification, but it is, like...
Yeah.
One of the stories she tells in The Husband Stitch is about a girl dared to venture into a graveyard after dark, and they told her that, like, if you stand on someone's grave at night, it would cause the inhabitant to reach up and pull you under. And she scoffs, and she's like, that's not real. And says scoffing is the first mistake a woman can make. And then it says pride is the second mistake. And so then she goes and she stands on the grave and she dies, you know, and as is expected, it's just a scary story. And it says, as it turns out, being right was the third and worst mistake. And that made me think of a line from a book that I think about probably once a week that I think is just crazy. It is from The Great Gatsby. And it baffles me. It's the best thing a girl can be in this world is a fool, a beautiful fool. And it baffles me that if we are to believe that F. Scott Fitzgerald wrote The Great Gatsby, that a white man in the 1920s wrote that line. And I really wonder if he was understanding the female experience to the extent that he was saying, if a woman is more than just like a pretty body for the world to look at, a pretty face, life will be complicated for her. Was he understanding that, or did he think that? Did he think? But like when you read his writing, I don't think that he thought. It really baffles me. But I think that I read that, and that's what I thought of. And then the second thing I thought was, doesn't it just piss you off to be a woman? Like, doesn't it? Like, isn't that just so annoying? Because it's kind of speaking to, like, if you try to be more than just kind of what you're saying, like an object for male gratification, it'll kill you. And that's not really, but in a sense. And I liked that story. And I also liked, I think in the next page, there's another story that's told, and this girl basically ends up among like these wolf cubs, and she like raises them as her own. And the story's not as important as the fact that it says she must have been better among them than she would have been otherwise. And makes me think of that trend that I've been seeing on the internet is like, would you choose the bear? Would you choose to be alone with a bear, a wild bear, or like a man that you didn't know? And a lot of women are like, I would literally choose the bear.
Yeah.
And there's so many things in this story that are like that just cut so sharp. And they say, isn't it just so frustrating to be a woman? And when you try to be more than what's expected of you, when you try to occupy more space than just the body that you're in, that's dangerous. And then when you do occupy more space, when you do just exist as who you are, as your truth, as your reality, then you're still violated. And then when you're violated and you try to scream and you try to tell people your truth, people just call you crazy.
Yeah.
And that's exemplified by that story about the potatoes looking like fingers when she's a child.
Yeah.
It really, I'm speechless in talking about this because I just think that it is so well done, and so infuriating at the same time.
Yeah.
And I also like that it just talks about the entire experience of like womanhood and how violence is intertwined with those. And it does that with like motherhood. And when she's going into labor, she's just like kind of hallucinating like all these different stories about giving birth. And it's like, there's a story about a woman who goes into labor when the attending physician is tired. There's a story about a woman who herself was born too early. There's a story about a woman whose body clung to her child so hard they had to cut her to retrieve him. There's a story about a woman who heard a story about a woman who birthed wolf cubs in secret. When you think about it, and she's kind of like panicking a bit and hallucinating and thinking about how scary it is. Like, shouldn't a woman be able to go into like the hospital and give birth to a child and not fear for her life? But she does. She's scared. She's thinking about the violence of her experience. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about, because I think it's incredibly relevant because of this story, is like, we've been discussing just like how this story is about like the female experience, specifically like the constant violation of a woman's body, and how throughout life you are violated in some way. And when you try to tell people that, they either don't believe you, or they say you're crazy, or they victim blame you, or whatever. Obviously that's not always true. I'm not saying that never once has a woman been believed.
Yeah.
But we wouldn't be discussing if it didn't happen more often than not. And there's so many examples throughout history where we see that. And like I mentioned earlier, this is particularly like, sexual assault, rape, domestic violence, reproductive rights, education access, being taken seriously, income disparity, access to leadership roles, political representation. Like, all of these things are struggles that women in society face. And then if you're a person of color or you are not middle to upper class, like, take that and double it. And if you're gender nonconforming, take that and double it. And so there's a lot of examples throughout history just how this has happened. Just countless women. I mean, Salem witch trials, like John Proctor is a villain, and a really well-known one is Henrietta Lacks. But the thing is, like, this has been happening for a really long time, and it's still happening. And really, we talk about it a lot more than we used to, but it's still happening. And what I wanted to end with in our analysis section is, we've been talking about the woman's experience, and I think we should, but I think also what we should be talking about is the men who are violating these women and what happens to them when they do that. So I'm going to read some names, and I'm sure you'll know why I'm reading these names when I start reading them. Donald Trump, Brett Kavanaugh, Diddy, Bill Cosby, Mike Tyson, Andrew Cuomo. Those are men who are famous or in positions of power. And all of those men have several allegations of sexual misconduct. Donald Trump has about 24 allegations. And who is he? Oh, he's the president of the United States. Brett Kavanaugh has 4 allegations of sexual assault and misconduct, and he's a U.S. Supreme Court justice. Diddy, if you don't know about Diddy, have you been reading the news? But he has countless allegations of so many different insane things: sex trafficking, sexual misconduct, numerous other charges. He was found not guilty of all counts except for 1 or I think 2 minor counts of transportation to engage in prostitution. Bill Cosby has dozens of allegations throughout his career, and he was convicted of sexual assault in 2018, but it was overturned in 2021, and he lives out his life. And I just read an article where he's talking about going on another comedy tour. Mike Tyson has multiple sexual assault and rape allegations and was convicted of rape in 1992. He did serve 3 years in prison, but just last year, he did an exhibition boxing match against Jake Paul that was like one of the most streamed things. I got insane attention. He owns 2 homes. He remains a public figure. Andrew Cuomo has 13 sexual harassment allegations that were confirmed by the Department of Justice, but he stayed in politics and he ran for mayor of New York City this election.
Yeah, is still running.
These are all men who, not just like 1, not just 2, but like multiple women have come forward and risked their lives and they've put themselves in the public eye to their detriment to say, like, I have been severely hurt by these men. And they were shamed, and they were turned into the butt of jokes, and they were not taken seriously, and these men still remain in power. And if that doesn't piss you off, sorry to get really intense at the end of this podcast, maybe stop fucking listening to the podcast, because that's insane. And I think that that's like the most important thing of this story is, like, we can talk all day about the experience of being a woman and how much it sucks to fear for your life, period, and fear for your safety just because you were born. But we should also be talking about the people who make that difficult and still get to remain in important places.
Yeah.
So, thank you. Thanks for listening. But yeah, whew, got me worked up. Doesn't it piss you off to be a woman? Yeah, and so let's do the 5 bookmarks of satire for The Husband Stitch specifically. Mm-hmm. This is something we do for every book and or story or piece of satirical media we consume, and it's just kind of markers of satire. How satirical was this story? So the first one is humor, and it's not particularly funny, but there are some moments that are like, huh.
Yeah, I think it's pithy a couple of times.
Yeah. Next one is irony, and that one is like strongly,
yeah,
I think.
Yeah.
And exaggeration, to an extent, with like the horror mystical elements, but
I honestly don't think that it's my place to say if it's exaggerating what the experience of a woman is.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really, I haven't given birth to a child nor been married to a man, but I don't think it's strongly exaggerating. I think that, like, because it's fiction and because it's like using these horror devices, obviously some of it's not real, mm-hmm. but I don't know. I would say it's not strongly using exaggeration. And then we have ridicule. Thoughts?
I'm not sure if ridicule would be the right word. I think that it is pointing out the behaviors of men and casting those behaviors in a correctly negative light, but it is very obviously centering the story and the experiences of women, and it is not trying to ridicule women for enduring those experiences. And at the same time, I don't think that it's necessarily trying to ridicule men for their actions, because you're not supposed to see this as funny. And I think that a key portion of ridiculing is that you're pointing out the ways in which a person or a group is behaving that is deserving of mockery. And I don't think that you're supposed to read this and say, oh wow, the way that men behave, isn't that crazy and twisted? I don't think that it's supposed to be taken as lightly as ridicule. So I would lean away from ridicule and more towards the critique.
Yeah, and I strongly critique, for sure. I agree. I think this is maybe like a 2.5-ish out of 5, and maybe we're getting a 1/4 point for like somewhat ridicule and a 1/4 point for exaggeration, but I don't think it's actually not that satirical in the grand scheme of things, but
yeah. No, it's not as satirical as some of the other stories in the collection.
Yeah, definitely not. And then lastly, just kind of overall, we'll give, like, at the end of this series we'll give our overall review of the book itself, star ratings, but like what did you think of this story? What closing arguments?
So I'll have some more thoughts when we're talking about the book as a whole, I think. But I didn't enjoy this book as much as you did and some other people, I believe, did. And I want to be very clear that whenever I am levying a criticism against this book, I'm not trying to give a reason why someone who likes this book shouldn't like it. I'm not trying to convince you out of your position, because I think that the reasons why I don't love it are very personal, and the reasons why someone would like it would also be very personal. And so, like, for this specific story, I think that for a story that is paying as much service as it is to folk stories and folk tales and the tradition of oral history, I think that it is doing a disservice to the stories that it's pulling inspiration from. Where I think that even in the quote that you sent to me from her, where she talks about how the story itself, up until this point, up until this reimagining, didn't have much self-awareness. And I think that I disagree with that. I think that that's a really simplistic take on what this theme of what this allegory has meant throughout history. I think this is a different and more pointed interpretation of it, but I don't think that it is an entirely new idea to add a subversive meaning to the existing stories. And this is something that I'll probably talk a little bit more about whenever we're doing a overall analysis. But I was reading some reviews because I kind of wanted to understand what it was that people enjoyed about this book, what it was that pushed this book from a 3.5 star book up to a 5 star for some people. And one of the reviews that I found, I think, put it really well. It was a very positive review, and one of the things that it talked about with this book is that it is much better at listening than it is at speaking. where these stories are relaying the experiences of women in a manner that allows readers to feel seen and feel heard, and having that experience affirmed is very powerful and meaningful when there's a lot of stories that are attempting to either not attempting to do that or are kind of doing the opposite of that. And so I think that as someone who does not necessarily as a man need to be listened to, the fact that it's not saying anything made it to where it was less meaningful to me than it would be to someone who does have something that needs to be heard and seen. And so I think that for me, the two things that I disliked about this was it felt like it wasn't necessarily saying something new, but it at times felt as though it thought it was saying something revolutionary.
I really like the style of
Yes.
her writing.
Yeah.
I think that was the first thing that got me about this book when I read it. I read it, I don't know how many years ago. I think it was in 2022. I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm.
But I loved like the genre bending and smashing together of genres, and I liked the style. Her memoir is also written in the style where it weaves like media and horror and classic tropes in with her own life, or her own experience. I guess it's specifically about like one experience in her life, but and I really like that. And as someone who's not a consumer of horror or even really like, well, I'm mainly just like horror, because like in the other book it talks a lot about like movies, like classic horror movies and things like that. As someone who I just don't have like a lot of knowledge of that, just because I generally, especially movies, don't really enjoy them. I liked that. I learned from it. It felt like an easier to consume form of it than, and I agree that maybe like there's not a lot of stories that haven't been told before in here, but I haven't seen them told in this format before. And I like that they're all in one place, and I like how like symbolic and open interpretation at the same time they are. It's kind of a choose your own adventure. Like you can, like kind of what you just said, but I mean this in a praise way. Like you can get out of it what you need out of it. And so I really like that about the book, and also about this story. And also The Girl with the Green Ribbon. I did have that like scary stories book when I was a kid, and I specifically liked that one. And I mean, as did a lot of 8-year-olds, but like I would tell it to my family and friends and stuff, and so I really enjoy it. It's not my favorite one in the book, but it is up there, I guess.
Yeah, and like the positives for me, I also, for this specific story, I did like the additional narrative elements of what voices you should be reading it in, and just the style with which it was told. I thought that was really interesting and creative, and I would never fault someone for really, really loving this story and really loving this book. Like, this isn't something like Fahrenheit 451 where I'm going to argue the point that it actually sucks. This is...
You're an idiot for like that.
It was very similar to me as that one review that we were talking about with Lula Dean's Little Library of Banned Books, where the reviewer was saying, do we really need a book like this where women are being treated like it's the 1950s? Like, are women really still putting up with that kind of treatment from their husband? Just kind of being really tone deaf about how the experience of being a woman is in many ways very similar, even though it's aesthetically different from what it was in the 1950s or previously.
Yeah.
Like, abusive and controlling relationships still exist. And I can absolutely see in this book that if you are a person in that position or a person who has had that experience, this is a very meaningful and very poignant book to relate that portion of your life that maybe hasn't been shown in this way before.
Okay. Yeah, so with that, we're going to close off. Is that a phrase? We're going to, with that, we're going to close out by playing a game that we play in every series we do, which is Have They Read It? Let's do it about the whole book rather than just the husband stitch.
Okay.
But yeah, so it's just where we like wildly speculate on whether or not public figures have read this book.
Yeah.
So let's do it. I will start us off with Monica Lewinsky.
Obviously a very relevant pick both for this story and the book as a whole. I would say yes. I'm not entirely sure what's pushing me in that direction, but I just feel like this is just popular enough and just relevant enough that I think she would have read it.
Yeah. Monica Lewinsky actually has a podcast, since we're in the podcast world, that I haven't listened to, but it's been recommended to me. It's called Reclaiming.
Yeah.
And it's about just taking back her story, but also just she does interviews with like all kinds of different people and like reclaiming their stories. Have you listened to any of it before?
I haven't. I feel like I heard about it a while ago, but it's not something that I have looked into or heard much about recently.
Yeah. Yeah, I could see her being into this, or at least reading it and like liking it.
Okay, so we're kind of in an era where, like, in social media and pop culture, we've been talking about the idea of performative male feminists, like guys who dress a certain way and consume certain media in order to put forward this feminist air, generally as a way in order to get laid. And this book feels like it fits into the niche, and this is not a comment on the quality of any of the books that I'm about to mention, but this book kind of feels like it would fit into the niche of like the bell hooks and stuff like that, where it's a book that's centering the stories of women, and as a result of that, a performative male feminist would pretend to read it or pretend to have read it in order to impress a woman.
That's funny.
And so that's leading me to think about the guy in pop culture who I do not believe is a performative male feminist, but his aesthetics completely embody that of a performative male feminist. Do you think star of the Fantastic Four and The Last of Us, Pedro Pascal, has read Her Body and Other Parties?
No, I don't think he has. No. Yeah, I don't think he actually is a performative male feminist either, but I can see what you're saying in that he
I just think that every performative male feminist dresses like Pedro Pascal.
That's who they aspire to be, really.
Yeah.
No, I actually don't think he's read it. I'm not sure, like, I've never seen like an interview with him or anything where he was talking about this reading. But yeah, I don't know. So this is probably a better question for me than it is for you, but I'll just ask you.
Okay.
Because I'm biased. So I was actually having this conversation earlier about how Taylor Swift that's the person, but let me she has a lot of lyrics that really like line up with the themes of this book as a whole. Specifically, if anyone wants a recommendation, as to the topic I was talking about, like not being believed, and like when you try to tell your story or when you try to speak up, people call you crazy. She has a song called Mad Woman. But yeah, Taylor Swift reads and she has a lot of lyrics that kind of align with like the female experience, but she's also a billionaire and a white woman. Do you think she's read this?
It doesn't surprise me that she is someone who reads, because what else would you do when you are on your private jet for that high of a percentage of the year? But I don't picture her as someone who would read or enjoy things that are horror adjacent. I feel like I see her reading more literary fiction or contemporary fiction books. I don't know if that's true or not. I don't know anything about her Goodreads Wrapped, but I would say that this isn't something that she's read. I think that both the tone and the genre, and then also the medium of it being a short story collection, all of those things really narrow the scope of who would be interested in reading this book. And at least 2 out of the 3 things that I just listed feel like things that would reduce Taylor Swift's interest in it.
She does like and mentions classics a lot. I also know that she likes Sally Rooney. She's mentioned Sally Rooney before. But yeah, I don't really know if she...
You know, broken clocks right twice a day.
Oh my gosh. I'm wearing... just so everyone knows, as we're recording this, I am wearing my Eras Tour hoodie, so I'm not... I won't speak.
So this is somebody that actually got mentioned earlier in the podcast, and someone who, as a result of their profession, has been involved in conveying similar messages, similar thoughts, similar themes to what is in this book. Do you think that Sadie Sink has read this?
Yeah, I do. I feel like she'd like speculative fiction based on what I know about her. And I feel like this is kind of falls in that category. It's very, yeah. Sadie Sink. Yeah, I mean, I actually don't know a ton about her, but from what I do know, I feel like she would enjoy and would.
I mean,
like
she, you know, got not necessarily her acting debut, but her role that really blew her up was in a horror thriller television show. And then, like you said, is now doing stage acting, talking about the experiences of women. Like, the overlap of those two feel like I would not be surprised if this was something that she had picked up and read.
Yeah, maybe she recommended it to Taylor when she was working for Taylor, so maybe Taylor has read it. Yeah, okay, well, that'll do it for today's episode. Next week, we will be talking about 2 more short stories from the same collection. They will also be intense for different reasons, so once again, give yourself breaks, take care of yourself. Don't listen if you don't need to. If you're a regular listener and this one is just not doing it for you, that's okay. We won't be offended. And I also just want to mention that I gave out the U.S. National Sexual Assault Hotline, and while that's an excellent resource, it might not be the only or best resource for you. You might be put on hold. You might not get the help that you, while I think like people do their best to provide the services that hotline and those crisis centers are designed for, sometimes it just might not be the resource that you need. So another resource is community and just depending on each other and taking care of your friends and your family and the people in your life and listening to them and believing them when they tell you about something that's happened to them.
Yeah, more and more in our
friends.
current political landscape, resources like hotlines for queer people and women and like all of these things are having funding reduced in a way that their capacity is also being reduced. And so while I don't know that there was ever a point in time when those resources were functioning at a level that was adequate for the amount of help that people needed, now more than ever, being there for each other is really the only guaranteed way that we can all be helped.
Yeah, but thank you for listening, and we would love to hear your feedback on this episode or the upcoming episodes, your thoughts on this book, your reviews. If you don't have anyone to talk to, I cannot provide you that resource, but maybe if you want to DM us, we can try to send you some resources that might help. We're there. We're a community. We're online. You can find us not just wherever you get your weekly podcast, but also on Instagram at the Satire Fire Pod, POD, and on TikTok, Blue Sky, and YouTube at the Satire Fire. And we'd love to chat with you there.
Yeah, absolutely. Like Sydney said, thanks for listening this week. Be sure to rate and review us anywhere that you're listening. We appreciate 5-star reviews. Leave a comment and we would love to interact with you. Our intro and outro for the podcast are remixes of the song 48 by Culla. And yeah, go check Culla out. They're also on Spotify at the very least.
All right, this has been the Satire Fire. We'll see you next week. I'm Sydney.
And I'm Samuel.
Bye.
Bye.
I just about come to the end of the road. Here, I've just about lost patience with you people. You get your ass out into the mountains or someplace or hide in there and watch that damn tube. But if not, fuck it. I'm done. In fact, my sermon